A billionaire suddenly dies after falling mysteriously ill. His fiancée claims grief. The world moves on. But here's the truth, he's not dead. Only one person knows he's alive, his maid. She heard a plan meant not just to kill him, but his 6-year-old son next. How did the maid save him? Why did the fiancé want them both gone? And how did the billionaire return to expose everything in public? Stay till the end because this story changes everything. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we begin, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. And tell me one thing, where are you watching this video right now, and what time is it in your city? We love to know that. Richard Hale had learned to recognize silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that comes after a long day, when the house settles and the world slows. This silence was different, felt alert, like something was waiting. He noticed it the moment his car rolled through the gates of the mansion. The driveway lights were on, brighter than usual. Inside the house, no music played. No voices, no laughter. For a place this large, it felt unnaturally still. Richard stepped out of the car, adjusting his coat. He had come home early. A meeting canceled. A rare gift of time. He had planned to surprise Vanessa, maybe take her out for dinner. They were supposed to be getting married soon. 3 months together. Fast, people said. But after losing his first wife in that car accident 2 years ago, Richard had learned not to wait for happiness. He pushed the door open. That was when Grace moved. She appeared out of nowhere. Quiet, fast. And before Richard could even speak, she grabbed his arm with both hands and pulled him sharply inside. "Sir, don't talk," she whispered. Her grip was tight, stronger than he expected. "Grace, what are you?" She covered his mouth. Her eyes were wide, not panicked, but focused, controlled, like someone standing in front of a fire, deciding which way to run. "Please," she whispered again, almost pleading now. Not a word. Before he could react, she dragged him toward the coat closet near the entrance. The door opened. Darkness swallowed them. Grace stepped in first, pulling him with her, then closed the door quietly behind them. The world narrowed. Richard's heart pounded. His breath felt loud in the small space. He tried to push her hand away, but she shook her head once, firmly. "Listen," she whispered, and then he heard it. Voices. Vanessa's voice. And another man's. Richard froze. Through the thin crack between the door and the frame, he could see the living room. Vanessa stood near the fireplace, a glass of wine in her hand. She was smiling, but not the soft smile she used with him. This one was sharp, relaxed, confident. Beside her stood a man Richard recognized immediately. Daniel Cross, Vanessa's old friend. The one she said was helping her plan charity events. The one who always seemed just a little too comfortable in Richard's home. Grace leaned closer to Richard, her voice barely audible. "They think you're still out of town." Richard's stomach tightened. Vanessa laughed softly. "It's already working," she said. "He's weaker than he realizes." Daniel took a sip of his drink. "And the boy?" Vanessa's smile didn't fade. "Later," she said. "One thing at a time." Richard felt the blood drain from his face. The boy, Ethan. His 6-year-old son was upstairs, asleep in his room. The same room Richard still hadn't changed since his first wife died. The same room where Ethan sometimes cried at night, calling for a mother who never came back. Grace's hand tightened on Richard's arm. She was watching his face now, not the room. Vanessa's voice dropped lower. "The doctors won't notice. Small doses. Spread out. Stress, grief, overwork. It all fits. No one questions a widower who collapses." Daniel nodded. "And once you're married, I won't even have to wait," Vanessa interrupted. "The will changes automatically. The company board follows. Everything comes to me. And the child." There was a pause. Then Vanessa spoke, calm and cold. "Accidents happen." Richard's ears rang. His knees felt weak. This couldn't be real. This had to be some misunderstanding. A joke taken too far. A nightmare. Grace leaned in, her lips near his ear. She's been switching your medication, she whispered. I saw it weeks ago. I didn't know how to tell you. Richard stared at the crack in the door, watching the woman he planned to marry speak about his death like a scheduled appointment. His chest felt tight. Vanessa lifted her glass. By the time anyone suspects anything, it'll be too late. He already trusts me. And no one listens to maids. Daniel smiled. Then let's toast to the future. They clinked glasses. Inside the closet, Richard's vision blurred. Something wasn't right. His head throbbed. A dull, spreading ache. His hands trembled slightly. He tried to breathe slowly, but the air felt thick. Grace noticed immediately. It's happening again, she whispered. Isn't it? Richard nodded once. Barely. She reached into her apron pocket and pressed something into his palm. A small cloth. Damp. Breathe into this, she said. Slow. Outside, Vanessa and Daniel moved closer together, their voices fading as they walked toward the kitchen. The moment they were gone, Grace opened the closet door just enough to look out. She listened, counted. Then she turned back to Richard. We can't stay here, she said. If you collapse, they'll finish it. Richard swallowed. Ethan. Grace nodded. I know. She opened the door fully. Your son is safe, she said firmly. I promise you that. But you need to trust me now. Richard hesitated only a second. Then he stepped out of the closet. The house he thought he knew suddenly felt like enemy territory. Grace moved quickly, guiding him down the hallway toward the back stairs, the one staff used, away from cameras and guests. As they moved, Richard's thoughts raced. His wife was dead. His future wife was planning to kill him, and his child was next. Behind them, the mansion glowed warm and beautiful. Ahead of them, everything was uncertain. But one thing was clear now. Richard Hale was not safe in his own home. And if Grace hadn't acted when she did, he would already be dead. Grace did not take Richard through the main corridors. She led him down the narrow service staircase at the back of the mansion, the one most guests never noticed. The lighting was dimmer there. The walls were plain. No cameras. Grace knew this because she had cleaned around every lens in the house for a year, memorizing their angles without meaning to. Richard's hand brushed the railing as he descended. His legs felt unsteady. Each step sent a wave of dizziness through his body. His heart beat too fast, then too slow, like it couldn't decide what to do. Grace noticed. Lean on me, she said quietly. He wanted to argue. He was a billionaire. He owned this house. He had commanded boardrooms full of men twice his size. But right now, he couldn't trust his own balance. He leaned. They reached the basement level. The air was cooler here, heavy with the smell of storage boxes and old wood. Grace guided him to a small utility room near the wine cellar and shut the door behind them. Richard's vision narrowed. The last thing he remembered was Grace lowering him to the floor. When Richard opened his eyes again, the ceiling above him was unfamiliar. Concrete. Low. A single bulb hanging overhead. His mouth was dry. His body felt like it weighed twice as much as it should. Grace was kneeling beside him, pressing a cold cloth to his forehead. You collapsed, she said softly. You were shaking. How long? Richard asked. His voice sounded distant, like it didn't belong to him. Not long. Minutes. She helped him sit up slowly. The room swayed. Grace took a breath. Sir. Richard. You're being poisoned. He closed his eyes. Hearing it out loud made it real in a way overheard conversations hadn't. His first wife had died suddenly. Car accident. One moment she was there, the next she was gone. He had rebuilt himself from that loss piece by piece. Vanessa had arrived like a solution. Warm. Attentive. Understanding. A lie built carefully enough to feel like comfort. They're doing it slowly, Grace continued. Small amounts. Enough to weaken you. Enough to confuse doctors. And Ethan? Richard asked. Grace's jaw tightened. I don't think they planned to wait long. The silence that followed was heavy. Richard pressed his palms against the floor, forcing himself to think. Panic would kill him faster than the poison. We go to the police, he said. Grace shook her head immediately. Not yet. He looked at her sharply. Vanessa already controls too much, Grace said. She has lawyers, doctors, influence. If you collapse in a hospital, she'll be notified. If she finds you before we have proof, you won't survive a second attempt. Richard knew she was right. And Ethan? He asked again. Grace hesitated, then said carefully, if they believe you're dead. The focus shifts. Richard understood instantly. He stared at her. You're saying I disappear. I'm saying you survive, Grace replied. The idea settled between them. Fake death. It sounded insane. But so had the idea that the woman he planned to marry was plotting to murder his child. Grace moved quickly after that. She brought him water. Crushed tablets she trusted, vitamins, not medication. She stayed alert, watching his breathing, his hands, his eyes. You'll rest here, she said. Just for now. Vanessa will notice I'm gone, Richard said. She already thinks you're out of town, Grace replied. And tonight, she's distracted. Upstairs, the house was full of laughter and wine. Down here, a life was being dismantled to save it. By morning, the news broke. Richard Hale had collapsed. A statement was released by Vanessa, tearful and composed. Stress, overwork, lingering grief. Doctors were doing everything they could. Grace watched the small television in the basement utility room while Richard lay on a thin mattress, barely conscious. Then the second update came. Complications. Then the third. Richard Hale has passed away peacefully in the early hours of the morning. Grace turned off the television. The room felt too quiet. Richard stared at the ceiling, his chest tight. Dead. In the eyes of the world, he no longer existed. Upstairs, Vanessa wore black. She held Ethan close during the press appearance, her hand resting possessively on the boy's shoulder. Cameras flashed. Sympathy poured in. Grace watched Richard's face as he saw his son on the screen. They'll use him, Grace said softly. Richard nodded. Which means we move fast. They couldn't stay in the mansion. That much was obvious. Grace used her one day off to leave unnoticed. She packed only essentials. Old clothes, documents, cash she had saved quietly over years of being invisible. Richard left at night, disguised in borrowed clothing, his face hidden beneath a cap. Grace guided him through a staff exit, timing it between guard shifts she knew by heart. They didn't speak until they were miles away. Grace's apartment was small. 2 rooms. No cameras. No luxury. But it was safe. Richard sat on her couch, his body still weak, his mind sharper than it had been in days. She'll take everything, he said. Yes, Grace replied. And while she does, she'll expose herself. Over the next days they watched. Vanessa moved quickly. Control of the company. Legal filings. A memorial announcement. Sympathy interviews. She cried on cue. She smiled when she thought no one was watching. And she never once mentioned Ethan's future beyond inheritance. She's rushing, Grace observed. Because she thinks she's won, Richard said. He sat back slowly, a new resolve forming beneath the exhaustion. They'll hold a funeral, he said. Public. Grand. Grace nodded. And after that, Richard continued, they'll stop being careful. Grace looked at him. You're planning something. Yes, Richard said quietly. But not yet. For now he stayed dead. And from the shadows, he watched the woman who had replaced his grief with greed begin to dismantle his life, unaware that every move she made was building the case against her. Vanessa mourned beautifully. That was the first thing Richard noticed as he watched her on screen from Grace's small apartment. She wore black dresses tailored perfectly to her body. Her hair was always neat, her makeup soft but deliberate. When she cried, it was never messy. Just enough tears to make people uncomfortable, just enough pauses to make them listen. She's performing, Grace said quietly. Richard didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the screen. Vanessa stood outside the mansion, surrounded by cameras, her hand resting gently on Ethan's shoulder. His son looked smaller than Richard remembered. Quieter, confused. My husband was a good man, Vanessa said into the microphones. He worked too hard. He cared too much. Richard clenched his jaw. Ethan and I are devastated, she continued. But we will honor his legacy. Grace turned off the TV before Richard could see more. She's already positioning herself, Grace said. Company, sympathy, control. Richard rubbed his temples. The poison still hadn't fully left his system. Some days were better than others. But the anger, that was sharp, clear. She's not grieving, he said. She's consolidating. Grace nodded. And she's not alone. Over the next week, patterns emerged. Vanessa met regularly with Daniel, always in public places, always careful. But Grace noticed details others wouldn't. The way Vanessa leaned in. The way Daniel spoke without fear. The way they left together, never too close, never too far. She trusts him, Grace said one night, replaying footage from a cafe across the street. Too much. How do you get this? Richard asked. Grace hesitated. I clean places like that sometimes. People talk when they think no one is listening. Richard studied her. You've been watching for a long time, he said. Grace met his gaze. People like me survive by noticing things. The funeral was announced 3 days later. Private cemetery. High-profile guests. Media presence expected. She'll feel safe there, Grace said. Protected by grief. That's when people slip, Richard replied. But they didn't act yet. Instead, Grace returned to the mansion. Not as Grace. She wore her old uniform, the one she had never thrown away. Clean, pressed, familiar. She walked through the staff entrance with her head down and her posture unchanged. No one questioned her. She's back? One of the kitchen staff whispered. She worked here for years, another replied. Probably helping Mrs. Hale. Grace moved through the house like a shadow. Every step triggered memories. She noted changes immediately, new locks, new guards, new routines. Vanessa had tightened security. But she hadn't changed everything. Grace cleaned, listened, watched. In the evenings, Vanessa drank more than she used to. She laughed louder. She stopped pretending to be careful. She thinks the danger has passed, Grace told Richard later. One night, Grace overheard something that made her hands shake. Vanessa and Daniel were in Richard's old office. She's selling the subsidiary, Daniel said. Fast. And the boy? Vanessa asked. Board wants him in public. Symbolic. Vanessa sighed. He's a problem. Grace held her breath. I don't want to deal with him, Vanessa continued. Children ask questions. They notice things. What are you suggesting? Daniel asked. Accidents, Vanessa replied calmly. They run in this family. Grace stepped back quietly, her heart pounding. Ethan, 6 years old. Still sleeping with a nightlight because he was afraid of the dark. Grace left the house that night shaking. They're going to kill him, she told Richard as soon as she returned. Richard stood up so fast the room spun. No, he said. Not while I'm breathing. That night the plan changed. Grace brought out a notebook she had been filling slowly for weeks. Schedules, names, security changes, conversations she had overheard. She keeps important things in the office safe, Grace said. Documents, old backups, things she doesn't want anyone else touching. Richard's eyes sharpened. Medical records? He asked. Grace nodded. I saw her lock them away the day after you died. And audio? Richard pressed. Grace hesitated. Not yet. Richard leaned back. Then we give her a reason to talk. The charity gala announcement came 2 days later. Vanessa would host it herself. A tribute. A fundraiser in Richard's name. She wants to show the world she's moved forward, Grace said. And she'll be surrounded by people who make her feel untouchable, Richard replied. That's dangerous, Grace warned. That's perfect, Richard said. They prepared carefully. Grace memorized the new guard rotations. She noted blind spots, camera delays, which staff had been replaced, and which hadn't. Richard rested. Clean. Recovered just enough. He watched footage of his son whenever he could. Ethan smiled less now. He stayed close to Vanessa in public but flinched when she touched him. "She's already controlling him," Grace said softly. "She won't get the chance," Richard replied. The night before the gala, Grace stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her uniform. "I go in first," she said. "I get what we need." Richard handed her a small phone. "It records continuously," he said. "Live backup." Grace nodded. "And if something goes wrong?" she asked. Richard looked at her seriously. "Then we change the story." She took a breath. "I'll be careful." "You always are," he replied. As Grace left the apartment, Richard sat alone in the dim light. He was dead to the world. But tomorrow he would walk back into it. Not as a husband, not as a victim, but as a father who refused to disappear. The mansion glowed that night. Lights spilled across the front lawn, illuminating polished stone and carefully trimmed hedges. Luxury cars lined the driveway, their doors opening to release guests dressed in black and silver. Soft music floated through the air, elegant and controlled, just like the woman hosting the event. Grace watched from the shadows near the staff entrance. She wore her old uniform again. Neat, invisible, perfect. No one stopped her. Inside, the mansion buzzed with movement. Waiters passed with trays of champagne. Guests murmured about business, charity, legacy. Richard's name was everywhere, spoken with admiration, sadness, respect. Vanessa stood near the center of it all. She wore a black gown that shimmered subtly under the chandeliers. Her posture was confident, her smile composed. She greeted donors with practiced warmth, thanking them for honoring Richard's memory. Grace forced herself not to look at her for too long. She moved instead through the kitchen, past the service corridor, down the hallway that led to the office wing. Everything felt familiar and dangerous. The office door was locked. Grace wasn't surprised. She removed the small key from her apron pocket. The old emergency copy Richard had once insisted every senior staff member carry. Something Vanessa had never bothered to revoke. The lock clicked open. Grace slipped inside and closed the door softly behind her. The office smelled the same. Leather, paper, wood polish. Richard's desk was untouched, as if time had paused there. A painting still hung on the far wall. One Richard had always liked but rarely looked at. Grace crossed the room and lifted it carefully. The safe was exactly where she remembered. Her hands trembled as she entered the code. The door opened. Inside were folders neatly arranged, USB drives, and a small glass vial. Grace stared at it. Clear liquid, no label. Her stomach tightened. She removed the vial first, sealing it inside her bag. Then the documents, medical reports, lab results, prescriptions. Fake. Every one of them. Charts altered. Dates adjusted. Diagnoses designed to point toward stress-related cardiac failure. Grace photographed everything quickly, then placed the originals back exactly as she found them. She was about to close the safe when she heard footsteps. Voices. Vanessa's voice. Grace dropped to her knees and slid under the desk just as the office door opened. Vanessa entered first, laughing softly. "Tonight went perfectly," she said. Daniel followed her in, loosening his tie. "You always did know how to control a room." Grace pressed herself against the floor, barely breathing. Vanessa poured herself a drink. "I'm relieved it's finally over. Pretending to be heartbroken is exhausting." Daniel chuckled. "At least the inheritance makes it worth it." Vanessa raised her glass. "To Richard. He really did leave me everything." They clinked glasses. Grace's fingers tightened around the phone in her pocket. "Did you move the files?" Daniel asked. "Yes," Vanessa replied. "The safe is the only place no one questions." Doctors signed off. The poison worked exactly as planned. Daniel smiled. "And the boy?" Vanessa's tone hardened. "Soon." Grace felt her chest constrict. "Children are fragile," Vanessa continued. "Another accident and no one will connect the dots. Especially not now." Daniel laughed quietly. "You really thought of everything." Vanessa leaned against the desk. "I had to. I wasn't going to spend my life as a rich man's replacement wife. Grace pressed record. The phone vibrated faintly as it captured every word. They talked freely. About the poison. About the forged documents. About how easy it was to manipulate people with the right story. Vanessa mocked the press. Daniel mocked the board. They spoke about Grace too, calling her invisible, irrelevant, disposable. Grace stayed perfectly still. Minutes passed. Finally, Vanessa checked her watch. We should get back. People will start wondering. Daniel nodded. Tonight seals it. They left the office together. Grace waited. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Only when the hallway was silent did she crawl out from under the desk. Her body felt tight, sore, but her mind was sharp. She had everything. The vial, the documents, the confession. She slipped out of the office and moved quickly toward the basement route she had memorized. Almost there. Then, Grace. The voice stopped her cold. She turned. Mrs. Matthews, the head housekeeper, stood at the end of the hallway, eyes wide. You're not supposed to be here, the woman said. Grace didn't think. She rushed forward, clamping a hand over the woman's mouth and pulling her into the nearest supply room. Shelves rattled. Bottles clinked. Mrs. Matthews struggled, but Grace was faster. I'm sorry, Grace whispered as she tied the woman's wrists with cloth from the supply cart. I won't hurt you. She locked the door from the outside and ran. Down the stairs. Through the basement. Toward the broken window she had noticed weeks ago. She squeezed through, scraping her arm on the frame, and dropped onto the grass outside. She didn't stop running until the mansion lights were far behind her. Richard waited in the car, gripping the steering wheel. Every minute felt longer than the last. Then he saw her. Grace ran toward him, breathless, hair loose, eyes bright with urgency. She opened the door and shoved the bag into his hands. I got it, she said. All of it. Richard didn't ask questions. They drove. Fast. Away from the mansion. Away from the lies. Grace leaned back in the seat, shaking now that the danger had passed. Richard held the vial carefully, staring at it. They tried to kill my son, he said quietly. Grace met his eyes. Not anymore. They didn't celebrate. They prepared. Because now came the most dangerous part. Showing the truth to the world. The gala was still in full swing when Richard and Grace returned. Music floated through the open doors of the mansion. Laughter echoed across the lawn. Guests clustered beneath chandeliers, unaware that the foundation of the evening was already cracking. Richard adjusted the collar of his suit as he stepped out of the car. The fabric felt familiar against his skin, grounding. Real. For days, he had existed in shadows, watching his life being rewritten without him. Tonight, that ended. Grace stood beside him, holding the small clutch that carried everything. The vial, the documents, the recording. This is the last chance, she said quietly. Once we walk in, there's no hiding again. Richard looked at the house, at the place where his first wife had laughed, where his son had taken his first steps, where Vanessa had smiled at him and planned his death in the same breath. I'm done hiding, he said. They walked toward the entrance together. No one stopped them. First, no one recognized him. Grief had already erased him in people's minds. He was supposed to be dead. A memory. A photograph on a screen. Then someone gasped. A ripple moved through the crowd. Confusion first, then disbelief. Is that? No, it can't be. I thought he. Richard didn't rush. He didn't shout. He moved with calm purpose, his eyes fixed on the stage at the front of the ballroom. Vanessa stood there, mid-conversation, smiling as she accepted praise for her strength. Then she saw him. Her smile froze. For a split second, the mask slipped. Her face drained of color. Her hand tightened around her glass. The room went silent. Richard stepped forward. Good evening, he said, his voice steady and clear. I believe this event is in my honor. A wave of shock moved through the guests. Phones came out. Whispers exploded. Vanessa recovered quickly, too quickly. This is sick, she said. her voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. "How dare you do this? He looks like him." But Grace stepped forward. "Vanessa," she said calmly. "They're recording." Vanessa's eyes flicked to the phone in Grace's hand. Richard raised the vial. "This," he said, "is what was killing me." Slowly, quietly, while the woman I planned to marry smiled beside me. Security guards shifted uncertainly. Vanessa shook her head, laughing nervously. "This is insane." He's confused. Grief does terrible things to people. Richard didn't argue. He nodded to Grace. She pressed play. The room filled with sound. Vanessa's voice, clear, sharp, unmistakable. The poison worked exactly as planned. Children are fragile. Another accident, and no one will connect the dots. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Daniel, standing near the edge of the crowd, took a step back. Vanessa turned toward him, panic flashing in her eyes. The recording continued. Laughter, jokes, arrogance. Every word buried her deeper. "Turn it off," Vanessa screamed. "This is fake." Richard spoke over her. "These documents," he said, lifting the folder Grace handed him, "are forged medical reports designed to make my poisoning look natural." He turned toward the crowd. "And this woman planned to do the same to my 6-year-old son." The room erupted. Guests shouted. Questions flew. Someone called for police. Another demanded explanations. Vanessa backed away, her composure shattering. "This isn't true," she cried. "He's lying. She's his lover. She helped him steal." Grace stepped forward again. "My name is Grace," she said. "I worked in this house for 1 year. I cleaned your floors. I served your meals. I watched you poison the man who trusted you." She looked directly at the guests. "And I watched you talk about killing his child like it was a scheduling problem." Silence fell. Heavy. Unforgiving. Vanessa turned toward the exit, but security blocked her path. Richard moved closer to her. "You didn't just try to kill me," he said quietly. "You tried to erase me, my son, my first wife's memory, everything that stood between you and my money." Police sirens wailed in the distance. Daniel tried to slip away. He didn't make it far. Vanessa collapsed into a chair, shaking, her face twisted with fury and fear. "You're ruining everything," she hissed at Richard. "You should have stayed dead." Richard knelt in front of her. "I stayed alive," he said, "because someone you thought was invisible refused to let you win." He stood and turned to the crowd. "This isn't about revenge," he said. "It's about truth, and protecting a child who can't protect himself." As officers entered the room, Grace felt something loosen in her chest. For days, she had carried fear like a second heartbeat. Now it began to fade. Vanessa was led away, screaming accusations that no one listened to anymore. Daniel followed, silent and pale. The gala was over, but something else had begun. Ethan didn't understand everything that night. He only knew his father was alive. Richard knelt in front of him later, holding him close as the boy cried into his shoulder. "They said you were gone," Ethan whispered. "I'm here," Richard said. "And I'm not going anywhere." Grace watched from a distance, tears blurring her vision. She tried to step back, to disappear again, but Richard stopped her. "Grace," he said, "you saved my life. And my son's." She shook her head. "I just did what was right." Richard looked at her seriously. "No," he said, "you did what was brave." In the days that followed, the story spread everywhere. The billionaire who came back from the dead. The fiancé exposed. The maid who told the truth. Charges were filed. Accounts were frozen. The company board reversed every decision Vanessa had made. And for the first time since his first wife died, Richard felt something close to peace. Grace returned to her small apartment, but not as the same woman. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer alone. One evening, Richard visited with Ethan. The boy handed her a drawing, 3 figures holding hands. "This is you," Ethan said, pointing. "You're the one who brought Daddy back." Grace smiled through tears. "Sometimes justice didn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived because someone quiet refused to look away. And when the truth finally stood in the light, no amount of money could bury it again. This story wasn't just about money or betrayal. It was about truth, courage, and the power of someone everyone chose to ignore. A maid who refused to stay silent. A father who refused to disappear. And a lie that couldn't survive the truth. Now tell me, do you think the fiancée deserved what happened to her? What would you have done if you were in the maid's place? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone.